Okay, so earlier we discussed a number of these pre-Socratic philosophers, all having in common the uh, premise or the project of identifying the one thing that everything is, or the stuff, or the basic stuff, right? Or the one, which for them will explain the two problems of the one and many and permanence and change. Uh, Here we're going to start talking about a new set of philosophers that we will call the Pluralists. Um, and they have in common with the previous group the fact that the same two problems. They want to explain the one and many, multiplicity and unity, or like unity and diversity, if you want to put it that way, and also the problem of permanence and change, right? But they don't agree that uh, this requires identifying one thing that everything is, and that's why they're called the pluralists, let's say, rather than the monists. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about is Empedocles. And if we characterize every pre-Socratic philosopher again with one of these phrases, everything is fill in the blank, right? Empedocles will say everything is a mixture of the four elements, right? So you see here that there's some kind of everything is. There's still some kind of unity here, because of course he is trying to explain things in a general sense, in a universal sense. But he doesn't explain things in a universal sense by identifying one thing that everything is, because he maintains the four elements as each one distinct from the other, and none of them reducible to some one of them or something else, right? Remember those four elements were earth, air, fire, and water, which the ancient Greeks considered to be the four basic elements. Okay, so we also have, we'll introduce this notion of the plenum, and you'll see what we mean by the plenum as we go along. Okay, so Empedocles now takes on Parmenides' own insight, right? That was the premise that what is, and what is not, right? So we're going to see how that idea of Parmenides is going to affect what comes now. So it follows from that fact that nothing is created or destroyed, and Parmenides also saw that fact. Nothing really comes into existence out of sort of nothing, and the thing cannot sort of be destroyed into nothing, right? And it also follows that the cosmos is completely full. There is something everywhere in it, and there are no empty spaces in the universe, right? By empty spaces, they mean like places where there's absolutely nothing, right? So you might recall the argument from Parmenides in last class, that against that there can only be one thing, right? And remember that argument basically observed that if there are two things, then they must be separated by, right? They must be separated. And if they're separated, they're either separated by something or by nothing, right? And then he said if they're separated by nothing, then they're not really separated because nothing separates them. So they're not two things, they're just one, right? And this is also basically a denial of nothingness as a thing, right? So what comes out here with Empedocles then is to sort of express that in this sense, the sense that there's no sort of spaces of nothingness in the universe. The universe is full of being, right? And the reason that the universe is full of being and that there's no nothingness sort of gaps or spaces in there is that nothing is not a thing, as Parmenides said, right? Yeah. But the problem Empedocles has with Parmenides, if there is only one thing, then there is no motion, right? Nothing can actually change. And that's what Parmenides actually, of course, argued, that change is not real, right? And then the problem is, well, obviously we experience change. And I think one of the things, in the background here is that if we say that we experience change, but it's not real, right? it's an illusion, because there's only one thing that doesn't change, then that raises the question, well, isn't there an illusion? There's obviously an illusion, and that illusion is of change. And we have two problems here, because the illusion is changing, right? We can't say that change is an illusion, but there is no illusion. There seems to be an illusion and it's changing. So we end up with change still, and also we end up with two things, right? The real thing that is one and doesn't change, and this other thing, which is an illusion, right? So that when we get a kind of a Parmenides point of view in philosophy, right, we always have this kind of problem. How to explain this illusion without postulating another thing, right, which we actually were trying to claim doesn't exist in the first place. So Empedocles, he takes, experience, well, to some degree, as it is, and there is obviously change and motion, and there doesn't seem to be any way out to try to explain it away, right? So therefore, there is more than one thing, because if there were not more than one thing, there couldn't be change, right? So you see, he's accepting Parmenides' insight that what is and what is not, right? So that nothing goes into non-existence, right, or comes out of non-existence as if that were a place or a thing. And so the universe is completely full. That's what we call the plenum. Huh? But he doesn't accept the conclusion that Parmenides draws from that there is no change and there's no multiplicity. Yeah. But he does realize that if change does occur, so let's say if something moves, it doesn't move into empty space, right? Because there's no such thing as empty space. Remember, there's no sort of space where there's nothing. Everything in the universe is something. So that means that things don't move around in emptiness or empty space. They always take the place of something else, right? The universe is full, yeah? So there's no way that a thing can just move without, sort of replacing the location of something else. Okay. Now, you have to sort of reflect on that a little bit, because when we say that the universe is full, we don't mean here that it's like a sort of full. Well, you can start with that analogy. Imagine a full room where people are so squeezed in there that you can't move unless somebody else moves out of the way for you, so you can shift around like a big crowd or a can of sardines, right? That's because even when you think of it that way, you probably think that well, if the people leave the room, there'll be this big empty space in there. Yeah, and that's not what's going on here, because it's obviously the denial of this sort of empty nothingness, right? Of course, someone would say if people leave the room, then the room will be full of air, right? It'll be full of something, at least. And that's basically what Empedocles is saying. The universe is full. You can't eliminate being from any place in it to have a sort of empty nothingness, because again, nothing is not a thing. Yeah? Okay. I haven't started playing this slideshow, and that's not good, so let's actually turn this on here. Yeah, okay. There we can see it better. Okay, so we go on to get an idea, help us to get an idea of this. We can think of this, we can, refer to this experiment that Empedocles used to prove his thesis that the universe is full. And you've all done this, right? Put a straw in water and cover one end with your finger, then lift the straw out of the water, right? The water in the straw does not pour out, right? And this is because he says empty space is impossible, right? If the water in the straw were to pour out, then that means that it would have to leave empty space in the straw, right? Let's say before the water all gets out of the straw. Because your finger's on there blocking it, so nothing else can get in from the other side, right? So if nothing was something that could remain there in the straw when the water leaves, then the water could just pour out. But the water does not pour out, right? It stays in the place that it is as long as your finger's on there, because your finger is preventing any something from getting in there and taking the place of the water as it, to allow it to leave. Yeah, it's a vacuum. There's no vacuum, right? That's what the idea of a nothing is. So, yeah, we have this experiment, this sort of empirical experiment that Empedocles uses to prove his point. That's the plenum. Okay. All right, so we can kind of go on to talk about now his cosmology, right? How to and this is where we get into the actual thesis that everything is a mixture of the four elements, right? Yeah. So he actually says that the cosmos is six things, and the reason that he has to postulate six things instead of just four elements is because of the fact that he believes that change is actually occurring, right? And so he has to explain how change happens. Because if things are a mixture of the four elements and things change, and that's going to be explained by changes in the mixture, right? Then, let's say how they're mixed together, then we're going to have to postulate some other elements in existence in order to explain how their mixture changes, right? So how we have the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water, right? Each one of these elements is, we can say, a Parmenidean one, yeah? That is, if we take an element like earth, there's going to be, all this earth in existence, and none of this earth came to exist from previously not existing, nor will it ever cease to exist. It's eternal. And the reason that that's the case is because, as Parmenides said, nothing is not a thing, right? So nothing is not something that a thing can be. A thing cannot be in the state of non-existence, right? So that it can come in and out of that state, because nothingness is just nothing, right? So it's funny to keep repeating that as if it makes more sense if you just keep saying it over and over again. But here we have it also that any element cannot sort of change into another element. So, the amount of earth in the universe, let's say, cannot really decrease by changing into air, because then again, earth will be not earth, right? And a thing cannot be what it's not, right? It can only be what it is. And so earth cannot change into air, air cannot change into fire, fire cannot change into water. And this is because of the rule of Parmenides. What is, what is not, is not. Yeah? So we do have a sort of sense here where Empedocles kind of is denying change, but in this, it seems that way. I mean, if you look at it from one point of view, he's still denying change, but he's trying to explain the appearance of change, right? Because what change actually is simply earth, air, fire, and water mixing in different sort of mixtures, yeah, different solutions. And so therefore, since one of the elements doesn't change into any of the other ones, and everything that we experience as changing is really just a mixture of these elements that are unchanging, it turns out to be that the changing is explained in terms of, or reduced to, the unchanging. And so, right, in a real sense, change is merely an appearance, whereas the reality doesn't change. Yeah. And this is made possible by the fact that Empedocles does not deny that there's multiplicity, right? He tries to maintain the ability to explain change explain change away in this sense, right? As an appearance, simply by denying the monism of Parmenides and accepting that there are more than one thing in the world. Okay, but the problem is, again, as we mentioned before, how and why do they mix up in the way they do? And that requires some kind of, something else, something that's not just an element, but some kind of force, right, that will actually mix elements and that accounts for their being mixed in this way or that way. And Empedocles does this by introducing two motions, right? Love and strife. Yeah? Now, these are motions. They're not like, elements. They're actually changes, in a sense. They seem to be species of what Heraclitus spoke of earlier as processes, right? They're kind of a certain type of change, a change that can be characterized by a certain kind of order, right? Because love is a motion, right? A change, which consists in uniting different things into a mixture. Where strife is a motion which consists of separating mixtures into their separate elements, right? So there you have it. You have one motion which involves mixing the elements together, right? And another motion involving separating the mixtures back into their pure, elements, segregating them, so to speak. Okay, so what Empedocles tells us is that the whole universe is a process. So you already have the influence of Heraclitus here, right? Thinking about process as an explanatory factor, as a real underlying feature of reality. This cosmic process begins with a first stage where love is dominant and the universe is completely mixed. So I suppose we're to imagine that earth, air, fire, and water are mixed so thoroughly that one cannot distinguish one from the other, yeah? Like as if you were to throw milk and eggs and flour and sugar into a bowl to make some cookies, and you mix it up so much with the mixer that you can't really distinguish the milk from the eggs or from the flour or from the sugar anymore. It's just one sort of solution, right? Apparently homogeneous, I suppose, but still, it doesn't get to the point where there's only one thing because, right, Empedocles doesn't believe there's only one thing. He thinks that there are four things and they remain four even when they're thoroughly mixed. Otherwise, change wouldn't be possible, right? So in the second stage, the other force or motion, strife, replaces love and the world goes through separation. These elements get separated out. And those that are different from them get removed from them. It's social distancing between the elements, right? So in the third stage, strife is dominant and the world is completely separated. So I suppose now can imagine a situation where the world is completely separated into little corners, right? So all the earth is in one place, all the fire is in another place, and the air and the water are on all separate places. And then in the last stage, love replaces strife again, and the world goes back through kind of mixing, right? So what we have in the world today, right, as Empedocles is saying, or in the universe, is, basically a phase of in between here, right? He thinks that we're in the sort of decadent stage, I think, the stage 3, where strife is dominant, right? I'm sorry, what does he say? What did I say here? According to Empedocles, in our time, the cosmos is in stage 2. Yeah. Strife replaces love and the world goes through separation. Yeah, so we're kind of going through, that's what I meant to say. Stage 2, not stage 3. Strife replaces love, and we're sort of, that's entropy, right? Things, if you leave food out, right, it sort of eventually rots. Yeah. And if you leave things, they sort of eventually decay. I suppose if we were in the stage 4, we're going the opposite direction, then, things in their basic elements would be coming together and forming sort of complex units, right? So it would be the opposite of what we see. Instead of rotting away, things would sort of come to be ripe or something, right? And eventually then become one again, yeah? But that's what we have. All the objects in the world are different combinations of fire, water, earth, and air in a process of mixture and separation, right? So they're not really things. Again, we have this sort of appearance versus reality, though we loosely call them things. The real things, what really is, are just the 4 elements and the 2 motions, So we have not explained change by and the one in the mini problem by um, by finding just one thing that everything is, but he's explained it by reducing the number of things to 4, and then of course the 2 forces, right? And then giving us a description of a process, right? We get process from Heraclitus, this sort of idea, and Empedocles now fills out or describes a specific process by which he's going to explain to us the change in the world around us. Right? Okay. There is Empedocles. The next pluralist that we'll talk about is Anaxagoras. Yeah? And if we were going to describe Anaxagoras with our everything is fill in the blank statement, we might say that he would be telling us that everything is everything. What do we mean by that? Yeah. Well, Anaxagoras notices that Empedocles suffers the same problem that Thales has, and maybe most of the others before had. They don't answer the question, how can water, or any mixture of the 4 elements, become all the things in the world, right? So Anaxagoras will say, look, we have in the world, let's say, cabbages and lions, right? Just to see how diverse the different kinds of things in the world are. We have cabbages and we have lions. How much different can you get? Right, the problem with Thales is he had to explain, if water is everything, how can water be cabbage? And how can water be a lion? Yeah? And Empedocles doesn't really evade that or solve that problem by admitting 4 things, because the question remains, how can any mixture of earth, air, fire, and water be, for example, a lion or a cabbage? Right? He wants to tell us that maybe it appears to be a lion, but it's actually a mixture of earth, air, fire, and water. And that remains, that leaves us still with the problem. What is this lion appearance? That how does this come to be? Right? How is it not just some mixture of, earth, air, fire, and water? So he shares the following premises, right? He shares the intuition, or not the intuition. It's like basically an axiom now. It's one of the foundational rules for these guys. What is, and what is not, is not. Obviously, it's a foundational rule, because if you don't agree to that, it's hard to see how you could think anything is true as distinct from false, right? Because anything could be and not be, right? So what is, and what is not. And from that, it follows also, that, again, that the stuff of the world, the things that are in the world, are permanent, right? Things aren't created or destroyed, yeah? But he then concludes that there is many, right? He's not going to reduce any of the plurality in the universe to just 4 or 1. But each of the different kinds of things is itself a permanity in one. It is what it is and can never become what it is not. So cabbage is an element, and lion is an element, and every different thing in the world is itself an element, right? So he really breaks with this idea, essentially, that earth, air, fire, and water are the 4 elements, because he's now saying that everything is an element, simply because, right, nothing can become what it's not. Lions can't become cabbages, right? Actually, neither can cabbages become lions, nor can water become cabbages and lions, right? Or anything like that. So, well, where do we go from there? He agrees that there is change, right? There's change and there's motion. So the question is, how can the qualitatively unchanging thing become the changing things that we experience? Yeah? How do we explain the change? Why wouldn't just the lion live forever and a cabbage just stay there? Like, a cabbage just is eternal. All the cabbages are eternal, they never decay. All the lions are eternal, they never decay. And the lions never eat the cabbages, right? And the cabbages never turn into lions, yeah? Nor did the lions ever, go into the soil and then become cabbage food and turn into cabbages. No. This would be the result if we were to leave it at this, right? But that's not how it appears, yeah? What appears is change. How do we explain that? Well, Anaxagoras tells us that in everything there is a portion of everything. So again, the many are not just these four roots, right, or elements that Empedocles talked about. Rather, Anaxagoras postulates this idea of seeds, right? So there are seeds of every kind of thing, like little particles. So, for example, what makes cabbage is that it's consisting of cabbage seeds, cabbage particles. And what makes lions is that lions consist of, right, lion seeds, lion particles. And there are hair particles and stone particles, etc. So every cabbage seed is 100% cabbage. There's nothing non-cabbage in it because, of course, right, that means that something would be what it's not. Cabbage seed is a cabbage seed 100%, and it's not in any sense not a cabbage. Yeah, and the same with the lion seed and the hare seed and every other kind of seed. Now he's going to tell us that everything, let's say every cabbage and lion and our experience here, has in it the seeds of every other kind of thing. Right? Wow. So every lion has some cabbage in him, and every cabbage has some lion in it. Right? Some lion seeds in there. So basically the things in the world aren't really pure. You know, they're not really purely 100% what they are, because they have a mixture of other things in them. The seeds of other things are in them, right? And so the thing that we experience, like the lion at the zoo that we see, is, you know, is as a lion because it's mostly lion seeds, right? But it has in it the seeds of every other kind of thing. But in a small amount, or such a much smaller amount that it's basically mostly lion, and therefore we say it's a lion, right? Same with the cabbage and all the other things, right? And this is how, right, Anaxagoras is going to explain how change can happen, because, right, if a lion, let's say a lion eats a cabbage, and the cabbage, you know, now becomes lion, right? Well, the cabbage doesn't really become a lion, right? This collection of seeds sort of gets put into this, you know, into this other collection of seeds. One collection of seeds is mostly cabbage seeds. The other collection of seeds is mostly lion seeds. So when, you know, you stick the collection which is mostly cabbage seeds into the collection which is mostly lion seeds, it'll still be a lion there with, you know, some more cabbage seeds in it, which may, you know, come out later, obviously, right? But as long as this thing, this conglomeration of seeds remains mostly lion seeds, it will be a lion, right? And same thing with the cabbage and everything else. Yeah, so in that way, things change, but they never become what they're not, see? Because each seed remains what it is for eternity. It doesn't sort of ever become what it's not. So Parmenides' rule that what is and what is not violated, right? We've explained change in a way that, you know, keeps in place this sort of rule of logic that a thing cannot be what it's not. So, but we still have change, right? So Anaxagoras has to explain that just as Empedocles did by introducing a kind of motion. But his motion, besides the seeds, so remember, every single thing that in the world that exists, you know, is an element, and there are seeds of that kind of thing that are always what they are, eternally, never change into any other thing, right? And the change that we experience is the sort of change in the different mixtures of these seeds, right? So, this change comes about by a force which Anaxagoras calls mind, right? And mind is what he says sets all things in order, right? Mind is the sort of force or power or whatever, the principle in the universe which explains things changing. Because of course you can't just say that they're, you know, if things you know, if we're just going to say there are seeds of every kind of thing, right, again, everything would sort of remain exactly as it is, right? But things don't. So there must be some reason for that, and that is what he says, mind. And so he gives us a different story about the cosmos, or the universe, and how it sort of sort of lifespan or cycle or whatever. In the first stage, he says everything, all the seeds, everything is completely mixed so evenly that no kind of thing can be distinguished from any other kind of thing. That was kind of like what Empedocles said with the 4 elements. But for Anaxagoras, it's not just the 4 elements, it's, everything. The second stage, he says, mind starts up a circular spinning motion in the stuff. It starts small and grows larger. Circular motions are going to be like, big in all the ancient Greek philosophy, because all the way till Aristotle, because the biggest motion that they observe, is the heavens, right? The sky, the stars and the sun and the planets all move in different circular motions. And so being observant astronomers and inheriting the observations of people from before their time who also were observing the stars, they know that there are these circular motions, that sort of, encompass the world. And so it makes sense, that you would think that this is the circular motion that stirs up everything in the world. And he's going to say mind starts up the circular motion and stuff, and then that motion starts small and it grows larger. So it's very much like mixing, but instead of, imagine, you have your cookie dough in the bowl and you put in your mixer and it starts spinning it around, and as that sort of spinning motion gets bigger, it separates out the ingredients of the cookies, right? So different kinds of seeds in this motion get separated off from each other and grouped into different kinds. So the lion seeds, as it's spinning around, like the lion seeds sort of conglomerate in certain places, the cabbage seeds conglomerate in certain other places, and the seeds of all the other things, sort of conglomerate, that's their word, stick together with their own kinds, like birds of a feather, right? And so eventually, everything will be completely separated off with its own kind. So right now the lions aren't purely lions because they have a mixture of all the other seeds in them as well. Same with the cabbages and stuff. But eventually everything will be completely separated off with its own kind. So the lions will be 100% purely lion. Cabbages will be 100% purely cabbage. And so forth, right? Everything will be completely separated off. But at this time, it's different. There are many portions and many things, but no thing, he says, is altogether separated off nor distinguished from anything else. Right? You have a little bit of everything else in you, and that's why, right, you are mortal, basically. You're a mixture of things that will sort of, pass away, right? When the mixture of your seeds, right, your human seeds, I guess, sort of disperses, But eventually, all human seeds will be separated off together, Which is interesting, because it seems to mean that in the end, there's going to be one human, one lion, right? One pure human, one pure lion, one pure cabbage, and one pure, 100% pure of everything, right? Which will be, I suppose, this really big one, because all the seeds of that thing that exist in the universe will be all together in one, Very interesting idea, huh? All right. Now, there's some other little bits here, little details to get into that'll be important for later philosophers. The seeds are infinitely small, according to Anaxagoras, right? And he feels like this must be the case. Infinitely small, right? Well, when we see the argument that he gives for why they must be infinitely small, we'll get an idea of what he means by infinitely small. First of all, he thinks there are an infinite variety of things. So there's actually an infinite number of elements, right? Not just 4. Infinite is a lot. Right? It's not really a lot, but he doesn't. We'll see. Everything has the seeds of every kind of thing in it, right? That's what he said already. So that means that everything has an infinite number of seeds in it. But everything is a finite size. So that means an infinite number of seeds must be able to fit into a finite space. And there's no way that an infinite number of seeds can fit into a finite space unless the seeds are infinitely small. What does it mean? So it must mean that if we could take one sort of lion, one chunk of lion, so to speak, and we divide it into smaller pieces of lion or cabbage, we can keep dividing it, right, for forever, and we won't get to a point where it's so small that it doesn't have any more parts that it can be divided into. That's the only thing that this can mean, right? The seeds are infinitely small. Okay. So, here's some important aspects of the theory that I think we have mentioned, and we just will review. For one, Anaxagorus' theory is irreducibly plural. He does not try to explain the diversity of the world in terms of one thing or in terms of some fewer things. Rather, he thinks the diversity in the world is basically itself a basic reality. The diversity that we actually have in the world is a basic reality that is not reducible to any fewer number of things. And so from his predecessors' perspective, they might think that he gave up on what they saw as the scientific question, right? How can we get to the world of apparent variety from qualitatively single but quantitatively plural real things? Obviously for him, his interest was to explain change, to explain the appearance of change, right? Without violating the Parmenides rule. And you can kind of see clearly how his theory is a sort of development or outgrowth of Empedocles' theory, because he's just following the same intuition of Empedocles. The reason that, the logic of Empedocles moving from looking for one thing to leaving it to the four elements, right, leads Anaxagoras to just ask, well, why not leave the plurality as it is? And, right, if we're going to say that everything is a mixture of the four elements, well, really, if we really want to avoid breaking Parmenides' rule, we actually have to say that everything is a mixture of everything. Because if anything is going to appear to change into something else, it's going to have to be the case that it doesn't become what it's not, it has to become what it is. And the only way we can explain that it actually becomes what it is when it changes is to say that it has the seeds of everything else in it. And you can see kind of why he calls it the seeds, because if you think of what a seed is, as opposed to just a particle, a seed is, something which has in it a potential, right? A seed for an apple tree is something which, it's not just a little piece of rock or sand or something, right? The difference between a seed and a chunk of wood or rock or sand is that if you put the seed in the soil and water it, it will turn into a tree, right? And kind of we think the idea here that the apple seed has within it the sort of ability, or has in it a kind of destiny, so to speak, right, to become an apple tree. It has within it this power that the rock doesn't have. And so it may make sense to describe that as saying that the apple seed has a tree within it, whereas the stone does not have a tree within it, right? And that's why he calls these seeds, because he wants to sort of explain how everything has everything else within it, yeah? And so that when it does appear to become what it's not, it doesn't really become what it's not. It only becomes what it already is. It becomes that which it has within it, right? That's why he calls them seeds. Okay. This is going to develop later with Aristotle into the philosophical notion of potentiality, which would be very important.